Welcome back, room 13. We are going to continue our read aloud of By the Great Horn Spoon. By the Great Horn Spoon. Remember, this is Praiseworthy, the butler to Master Jack. They have stowed away on a ship, and they have told the captain about what they have done and are now working off their passage to get from Boston all the way to California for the gold rush. Let's see what will happen in chapter 2. Chapter 2, How to Catch a Thief. And look, we have a little drawing here. It's that pig. Wasn't that pig from our dedication page? Look at that. Well, I know last time they gave us a picture, it was of Praiseworthy and Jack hiding in those potato barrels, right? And so that was a key part of the story. So I'm thinking maybe this pig here is going to be a key part to our chapter 2 story. Let's see if my prediction is correct. How to Catch a Thief. After many days, like a dog after a rain, the Lady Wilma shook winter from her masts and riggings. She entered the southern latitudes. The sun came out bright and fresh as if newly forged, and the nights were speckled over with stars. The fires went out in the pot-bellied stoves, and the passengers began to shed their great coats and heavy woolens. In another week, they were down to their shirt sleeves. In the lower regions of the ship, Praiseworthy and Jack were still at their shovels. They were powdered over with coal dust, but Jack did not mind the work. It would toughen him for digging in the gold fields, he thought. Still, the roaring flames had lost their friendliness. The boiler room was becoming distinctly overheated. "Master Jack," said Praiseworthy, thinking of the tropic zones that lay ahead, "another week at our post and we shall be roasted alive." But the heat did not bother Jack, for every turn of the paddle wheels brought the far country a bit closer. Even though the sea route was the long way around, it was faster than the overland trail across the plains. The ox-drawn wagon trains were sometimes a year in reaching California, and Jack was in a hurry. Oh, I remember he told us earlier that he needed to get to California to make money at the gold rush to send back to his aunt, who he lives with his 2 sisters, right? Because their family was running out of money, right? So that's why he's in a hurry, and that's why he didn't take the overland trail. Okay, I remembered that. Every day counted. It was fine with him that Captain Swain was making a race around the Horn. The captain was in a hurry too. Still, it would be months before the Lady Wilma dropped anchor in San Francisco Bay. There would hardly be time enough to complete the voyage, reach the mines, make a fortune, and return to Boston before Aunt Arabella had to sell everything. But try they must. "This infernal firebox," Praiseworthy said, wiping the sweat from his face. "We must think of a plan. We must expose the rogue who light-fingered our passage money." The truth of the matter was that neither Jack nor the butler had the slightest idea how to go about catching a thief. But Praiseworthy was undaunted. They would surely think of something. Meanwhile, they fed the flames, strengthened their backs, toughened their hands, and slept on deck after a hard day's work under a balmy sky. In their free time, they washed in buckets of seawater, and Jack began a letter home. He had no idea when or where he would mail it, but Praiseworthy had packed pen and paper and had no intention of allowing Jack to forget his duties. "But I would avoid any direct mention of our temporary misfortune," said the butler with a wink. "No point in worrying your Aunt Arabella, even for a moment." Finding a shady spot under a lifeboat, Jack spread out his writing materials and began. Now in my book, there's this big space and the font changes. And so that tells me that the next part I'm reading is actually the letter that he said he was going to write. So I want to pay attention to those changes in the font so that I know that I need to read this part a little different, right? Because if this book was true, reading a letter that Jack wrote, that would be a primary source, right? And so we know that we need to switch our brain into saying, oh, this is something that really happened. This is a story that really happened. And so I need to read it kind of differently. So we want to do the same thing in this story. Here's the letter. Dear Aunt Arabella, dear Constance, dear Sarah, by this time you have found my note on the tea service and learned that Praiseworthy and I have joined the gold rush to California. I am writing this at sea. Please do not worry, as we are well and happy and getting plenty of good exercise. Our ship is the Lady Wilma, and we are racing the Sea Raven to San Francisco. But at the moment, we don't know whether we are ahead or behind, as our ships became separated in the bad weather. But now the sky is as blue as it can get. It is hard to remember that you are still braving winter back in Boston. I go barefoot. Praiseworthy says we will soon be seeing the Southern Cross in the sky. I'm getting used to the food. We have salt beef and sea biscuits, which are very filling. For dessert, we have dandy funk, which is molasses pudding, or plum duff, which is just about what it sounds like. You would be very proud of me, Aunt Arabella, as I eat everything. Praiseworthy wants to be sure to be remembered. We are partners. We intend to come sailing back to Boston in a year. We will be rich as can be. The ship is very crowded. Everyone is anxious to get to California before the gold is gone. We see other ships on the sea almost every day. They are all California bound. I think it is going to be very crowded in the gold fields. I will tell you about some of our passengers. There is a horse doctor with a wooden leg. There is a judge with a scar over his eye. He rolls his own cigars and carries a sword cane. We have several soldiers who fought in Mexico. They call themselves Mexico fighters and spend most of their time telling stories about the war. They are high-spirited and always laughing. I meant to mention that we have live animals aboard. They will provide fresh meat during the voyage. We have crates of chickens, a sow and 3 pigs, 2 sheep and 1 head of beef. I've made friends with the smallest pig and named him Good Luck for good luck. Praiseworthy says pigs are very smart. It seems strange not to be in school, but I am learning things every day. I will leave this letter unfinished and take up my pen again as adventures befall us. You know what? As I was reading that, he said, it seems strange not to be in school, but I am learning things every day. That kind of reminded me of what we're doing, right? We're not physically at the school. School seems a little different. We're on Zoom, right? But we're still capable of learning new things, right? And we can do that even when we're not in a classroom. We can do that when we're on a walk with our families. We can do that when we go to a museum, right? And so even though this story is supposed to be set a long time ago, over a century ago, right? Almost 2 centuries ago, we're still thinking about how you can constantly be learning new things. And I like to know that that's something that goes across all of time. I find that comforting. All right, back to the book. The following day, toward dusk, Jack was washing up in a bucket of seawater when Praiseworthy was struck as if by lightning. Master Jack, he exclaimed, you have it. Have what? Answered Jack, looking up. He had had good luck with him in the boiler room, and now even the pig was covered with coal dust. Why, the answer. The answer? The answer to what? Praiseworthy's eyebrows shot up with delight. We'll catch the thieving scoundrel at last. You've hit it, Master Jack. You have indeed. Jack couldn't think what he'd hit, but the next thing he knew, he was following Praiseworthy like a squirrel up one ladder and then another to the pilot house. Captain Swain turned and gave the two intruders a weather-beaten squint. His temper, if not the growl of his voice, had improved with the weather. "How is the blasted voyage agreeing with you, my hearties?" "No complaints, sir," said Praiseworthy. "What brings you above decks?" And Praiseworthy answered, "You may recall that Master Jack and I suffered a slight misfortune at the very outset of this voyage. Some blasted, that is to say, some despicable thief made off with our funds. Master Jack here has hit upon a scheme to expose the rascal." "Me?" said Jack. You know what? It sounds like Jack's confused. I'm confused too. What did Jack figure out? What did Jack do? I'm going to keep that question in mind as I keep reading. See if reading more tells me, but if not, I might need to go back and read again. "Bah!" the captain interrupted. "I don't believe there's any such scamp aboard my ship. I asked the first mate to take a close examination of our passengers list. Gentlemen, they are, most of them, and the others are too crude for the clever art of the cut-purse." "Nevertheless," said Praiseworthy, "I believe he's among your passengers like a fox among sheep. Allow us to prove it." Captain Swain scratched through his dark whiskers. "How do you figure on exposing him?" "We won't expose him, sir. He'll expose himself. If you will have all the passengers assembled in the main saloon after dark, we'll know very soon whether or not you have a clever thief aboard." "By grabs," said the captain thoughtfully. "It's worth a try." So, if I'm thinking about that question I said I was confused by what Jack's confused about, because Praiseworthy keeps saying that Jack has come up with an idea, but Jack doesn't seem to know what the idea is, and I don't know what the idea is. And I've got back, I'm looking, and I still don't see it here, so I didn't miss it in what I was reading, but it's important that I checked. So I'm going to have to keep reading and hope that this is one of those times where the author wants me to wonder, right? They've got me hooked. And so I have to keep reading to figure out what it is. What is this plan to catch the thief, right? So let's see if the author, really gives it to me. And another thing I wanted to notice, you don't have the book in front of you, so I'll show you on mine. There are these extra spaces right here between this part of the reading and this part of the reading. And the last time that happened was because of the letter, right? So they put a bunch of spaces between the rest of the story and the letter. But this isn't another letter. This is just more of the story. So I think I'm going to pay attention while I'm reading for more of these extra spaces to see if I can figure out why these extra spaces are here. What's their purpose? Because we know that our authors usually do things for a reason, right? And that includes the font they choose, if they underline it or bold it, and sometimes it even is about how many spaces they put. Sometimes they're trying to tell us something. So I want to be thinking about that as I continue to read. When the sea turned black, the whale oil lamps were lit in the main saloon, and the passengers began to gather. They joked and joshed, glad for something to do, for they were not used to the idleness of life at sea. Jack waited on deck with the black sow from the animal pens. He saw the horse doctor enter on his peg leg, followed by the judge smoking one of his homemade cigars. The ex-soldiers were singing, "I'm going to California with my washbowl on my knee." When all the passengers were assembled, the captain made a grand entrance, puffing on a twisted black cigar, and with his long coat flapping almost to his knees. "Gentlemen," he said, "I'll get to the point. I am told there may be a thief among us, a cut-purse. We can't have that now, can we?" "No!" roared out the gold seekers, giving their purses and money belts a reassuring touch. "We'll string 'em up," yelled a big fellow known as Mountain Jim. He had full red eyebrows and wore a bobcat cap. The captain held up a hand to stop the voices. "This cut purse has already struck, gentlemen. He lifted the savings of Mr. Praiseworthy and his young partner. You've seen them working off their passage at the coal bunkers. The thief may strike again. Any one of you may be his next victim. He may be standing at your elbow. I'll now turn the meeting over to the aforementioned persons who have a plan to capture the scoundrel." Praiseworthy, tall and calm, stepped forward. "Thank you, Captain Swain," he said. "Our plan is very simple, gentlemen. Master Jack, the sow, if you please." At that signal, Jack led the big black hog to the center of the saloon and tied her to a post. The men began to exchange baffled glances. What had a large sow to do with catching a thief? But if there was a thief among them, they wanted him caught. Their own purses weren't safe with a light-fingered fellow aboard. "A pig is a smart animal," Praiseworthy explained. "None smarter," yelled Mountain Jim. "Take this old sow," Praiseworthy went on. "She's very wise. We've discovered that she can tell a dishonest man by the mere feel of him. She squeals. Gentlemen, you can't even tell a simple lie in her presence. She'll squeal every time. A most remarkable hog, I must say." Jack looked about at the many faces shining under the flickering whale oil lamps. There were the horse doctor and the Mexico fighters and the judge with his sword cane. Not even Mountain Jim with his fur cap was above suspicion. Jack fed the black sow a limp carrot to keep her quiet, but he began to feel anxious. What if Praiseworthy was wrong and the thief wasn't aboard the Lady Wilma at all? "I assure you," Praiseworthy was saying, "that if the cut purse so much as touches this hog, she will squeal. If you will line up, gentlemen, we'll get on with it. After the lamps are blown out and the saloon is dark, come up to the sow, one by one. Touch her with your right index finger. When she squeals, we'll have our thief." "I'm for it," one of the ex-soldiers said. "Me too." "A good plan," said the judge. "Suits me," agreed the horse doctor, turning on his peg leg. "Some of you boys get the lamps. Let's see how smart this hog is. If you're an honest man, you've got nothing to fear." So this is the plan? They're going to have them touch a pig and the pig's going to know who it is? I hope there's more to it than this. I'm going to keep reading. A moment later, the saloon was in pitch darkness, and Jack held himself very still, feeding carrots to the animal so she wouldn't squeal. Why doesn't he want her to squeal? Don't we want to know who the... Guys, I'm still left out of this. I need to read more to understand this. One by one, the gold seekers approached and ran a finger along the sow's back. A minute passed. 2. Not a sound from the hog. The passengers scuffed across the deck in their boots, touched the hog, and retired. The men were silent, listening for the squeal that would trap the guilty man. 10 minutes passed, and still they came. Even Praiseworthy felt a bit tense now. When finally the whale oil lamps were relit, the black sow hadn't uttered a sound. She stood in the center of the saloon, wondering what all the fuss was about. Captain Swain stepped forward, scratching his beard as he looked about at his passengers, and then turned to Praiseworthy. "Looks like you made a mistake. That cut purse isn't aboard this ship. By grads, I'm sorry about you and the lad there, but it looks like you'll be shoveling coal all the way around the Horn to California." "One moment," said Praiseworthy, as unconcerned as you please. "It's true, the The sow didn't squeal, but the guilty party stands in this room, sir. Gentlemen, Master Jack and I took the liberty of powdering this black sow with coal dust. If each of you will now examine your right index finger where you touched her hide, you will find a smudge. Every man in the saloon instantly turned up his hand, and there indeed was the smudge of black dust. I get it now. I think I get it. Let's find out if I'm right. I think I got it. Praiseworthy didn't waste a moment, but one of you, fearing that the sow's squeal would give you away, one of you approached but didn't touch a finger to her back. Look around you, gentlemen. If there is a man among you without coal dust on his finger, he has exposed himself as the thief. Almost at once, there was an outcry from one corner of the saloon. We got him! Passengers, suddenly angry, crowded around, and Jack couldn't see who they had pounced upon. Well, string him up! Look there, his finger's clean as a whistle. It's the judge! Judge my eye, he's an imposter! Jack burrowed through the crowd in time to see the judge attempt to draw his sword cane. But the Mexico fighters jumped in and pinned his arms back. By the time the ship's officers got hold of the frock-coated imposter, his hat was caved in, and the cigar hung in shreds from his mouth. Now the crowd opened up, and Jack had never seen Praiseworthy with such a fierce look in his eye. I suppose we'll find the balance of our money in your cabin, sir? Try to find it, spat the thief, peering from Jack to Praiseworthy and back again. Clever you are, but we'll meet again. I warn you, or my name's not Cut-Eye Higgins. Humbug, said Praiseworthy just as sharply. The miners had their own ideas of justice, and the suggestions went flying around the saloon. Pitch him overboard and let him swim to California. String him up, put him in irons. But Captain Swain already had his mind made up. Take him to the coal bunkers. By the time we cross the equator, by grabs, he'll think he's in Hades. That's the end of chapter 2. We're going to start chapter 3, News of the Sea Raven. News of the Sea Raven. So I'm looking at this picture, and I see what appears to be the captain. I assume he's the captain because of his hat and because of his looking glass. And I know from the last picture, because that sow was really important to chapter 2, that this, and with the title, that this might be an important part. News of the Sea Raven. Because remember, the Sea Raven is the ship that they are racing, that they need to beat, so that the captain can win a new ship. So I'm sure something about that is going to happen. Chapter 3. The boy and the butler moved their carpet bags into a cabin with one porthole. 4 bunks and 6 passengers. A hammock was strung up for Jack. Since Mountain Jim preferred to sleep on the floor with his yellow bobcat cap for a pillow, there was room for all. Shucks, he smiled. If I was to sleep in a bed, I'd think I was sick. Among their cabin mates was Dr. Buckbee, the horse doctor. He was going out to the mines on his wooden leg to locate a rich gold deposit. He had a map, he whispered, that marked the very spot. At the same time, he carried an alarm trumpet around his neck day and night in case anyone tried to take the map from him. In addition to Mountain Jim and Dr. Buckbee, there was an ex-soldier named Nath Tweedy. He still wore his forage cap and hickory shirt and kept his rifle and bayonet propped in a corner of the cabin. Finally, there was Mr. Azariah Jones, a jolly Yankee trader who was as big as the cabin was small. As Jack was soon to discover, Mr. Azariah Jones could squeeze through the cabin door only by holding his breath. He said he weighed 300 pounds, barefoot and bald-headed. It amused Praiseworthy that the Yankee trader had unwittingly provided Jack and himself with their accommodations in the hold. The 18 barrels of potatoes belonged to Mr. Azariah Jones, who planned to sell them in San Francisco. When all of these passengers were in the cabin at one and the same time, it seemed to Jack that the walls would burst. At night, the chorus of snoring and snorting was a sea-going grand opera. Jack learned to fall asleep with his fingers in his ears. When a good wind was blowing and the Lady Wilma spread her sails and saved fuel, day by day, the sun grew more fiery. Soon there was hardly a breath of air left on shipboard. What does that mean? I think I'm going to read it again. I'm trying to understand what I just read. When a good wind was blowing, the Lady Wilma spread her sails and saved fuel. Soon there was hardly a breath of air left on shipboard. Okay, so this is a ship that can use coal or it can use its sails. So on days when there's lots of wind, to save on the coal, they just use the wind power. Okay. And now there's hardly a breath of air left on shipboard. So it means the wind's kind of died down. I think that's what that means. The canvas hung limp and dispirited from the yardarms. Tar oozed from between the deck planking and dripped from the rigging. But with her machinery clanking, the ship went thrashing on and digging her stout bows into the equator. Okay, so because they have the coal, even though the wind died, they can still use the coal to power the ship to keep moving. So they're still moving south, even though the wind isn't in their favor. There's no wind anymore. They're still able to keep moving. Whenever Jack went, good luck went. The pig came trotting at his heels. When Jack stretched out under the stern boat to add a few words to his letter, the porker found him and nuzzled into the shade beside him. Jack refused to scratch his back. "I told you yesterday," he said. "He must be stern." "You'd better stop following me. We've got to stop being friends, you and me, sir. I've made up my mind. If pigs were so smart, they wouldn't eat so much. See how fat you're getting? Don't you know you're going to end up in the galley? Every time the cook sees you, he smacks his lips. Sunday dinner, that's what you are. Go away, sir." But the porker merely nudged Jack's elbow lovingly with his black snout. "I told you," said Jack. "I'm not going to stretch your back anymore. Let me be." There was no reasoning with the porker. He promptly fell asleep in the shade and gave Jack a heavy sigh. There was no escape for the pig. Next week or the week after, the cook would come looking for him with a meat cleaver. Jack put it out of his mind and let the porker sleep. For a moment, he watched the flying fish, startled by the crash of paddle wheels, leap through the air like arrows shot from the sea. Then he wrote. And then again, the font changes, so I know that I'm about to read what he is writing in his letter. I need to change how I'm reading it, right? "I take pen in hand again, dearest aunt and dearest sisters, to tell you of our adventures to date. But first I will say that you would hardly know me these winter days. I am brown to a crisp, except for my nose. It sunburns something awful and keeps peeling. Captain Swain says my nose looks like a molting chicken. We still have had no sight of the Sea Raven, so I can't tell you how the race is coming. I certainly hope we win. Praiseworthy wants me to be sure to remember him to you. I see I have already said that above. He just passed by. He walks around the deck 50 times every day. He carries his umbrella for shade. Hoping you will not worry, I will confess that we had a certain misfortune at the outset of our voyage, but all is well now. I have already mentioned the judge who rolls his own cigars. We took him for a gentleman, but that was an error in judgment. He is a desperate scoundrel whose name is Cut-Eye Higgins. Imagine! But he was no match for Praiseworthy. I can tell you now that Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins had stolen our money. We had to work off our passage at the coal bins. We never complained, not once. Praiseworthy says that if it weren't for me, we might never have trapped Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins. But it was really the other way around. Praiseworthy never takes credit for himself. All I did was take Good Luck to the bunkers with me, where he got covered with coal dust. That put the idea in Praiseworthy's head. Someday, when we sail back to Boston with our pockets full of gold nuggets, I'll tell you more and make you laugh. But you will be glad to know that Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins spends his days at the fire below decks, while we have our rightful cabin. We thought we would never find the rest of our money, which the thief had hidden. Captain Swain helped us search the cabin, lighting up one of Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins' homemade cigars. We looked everywhere and wouldn't have found the money at all if Captain Swain hadn't begun to choke on the cigar. There, rolled up inside, were our Boston banknotes. I will mail this letter at our first port of call, Rio de Janeiro. Imagine that. Your devoted runaways are seeing the world. I must stop now as I just heard someone call, "Ship ahoy!" Maybe it is the Sea Raven. That's the end of what he's written so far at the letter. When Jack looked up, the captain was standing on the paddle box, squinting at a distant ship through his brass-long glass. "Blast!" he scowled. "She's not the Sea Raven, mates. She's a square rigger, but calmed, no doubt. There's not enough breeze in these latitudes to snuff out a candle." So, there's not enough breeze to snuff out a candle. So that means there's no wind. But their ship is able to move without wind because it's called a side wheeler, where they use coal, right? So they called this ship that they're looking at a square rigger, and it's stuck without the wind. So that must mean that it's only wind powered. It doesn't have anywhere for coal. So I need to remember that. A square rigger is a different kind of boat. It doesn't use coal. Okay. It was almost 2 hours before the two ships came within hailing distance. Praiseworthy finished his 50 laps around deck, and Jack locked Good Luck in his pen. But 10 minutes later, the porker was at Jack's heels again. Captain Swain got his silver speaking tube and shouted across the water. With all her sails hanging like great curtains, the square rigger seemed to Jack like some giant of the seas. "Ahoy! Ahoy!" answered the master of the square rigger through his silver speaking tube. "Have you seen the Sea Raven, sir?" "Aye, Captain. She came steaming by a day ago." Captain Swain lowered the speaking tube from his lips long enough to say, "Blast." The voice from the square rigger floated across again. "Can you give us a tow, Captain?" "What's that?" "I've been becalmed for a week. We're 36 days out of New Orleans and bound for California. Fever has broken out below decks, sir. The Sea Raven turned her back on us and ran. I beg you, sir, give us a tow until we catch a wind to make port." Jack, standing on a capstan, could tell that Captain Swain was about to order full speed ahead. But now he could be seen pacing back and forth on the paddle box, growling and grumbling to himself. Under the tropical sun, the brass buttons on his coat glowed like lumps of fire. Towing the square rigger would slow the Lady Wilma to a dogged crawl. Praiseworthy, too, under his black umbrella, watched the captain. Every gold seeker aboard seemed to be holding his breath, waiting for Captain Swain to make his decision. To come to the aid of the square rigger could very well mean that the Lady Wilma might be put out of the race. She might never catch up with the Sea Raven. Captain Swain rubbed his plump nose. He cocked an eye at the sailing ship with her canvas hanging dead from the yards. Then he raised the speaking tube to his lips and shouted, "Glad to help, sir. We'll throw you a hawser." There came a wild shouting from the rails of the square rigger, where passengers and crew tossed hats in the air. Jack couldn't help being swept up in their joy and relief, and he told himself that the Lady Wilma might yet get back in the race. If Captain Swain didn't think of something, Praiseworthy would. Within the hour, the side-wheeler was in harness, like a sturdy ox pulling her burden across the equator. The Great Southern Cross rose higher in the heavens. Jack's education proceeded without books. Praiseworthy borrowed Captain Swain's brass long glass, and at night the sky became their textbooks. They examined strange constellations and star clouds. It was a glittering landscape never seen overhead in Boston. Praiseworthy, said Jack. Was my father anything like you? I mean, nothing like me, Master Jack. They were silent for a moment. There were times when Jack felt a great emptiness, a loneliness that not even Aunt Arabella could dispel. Even if they should find no gold in California, he was glad to be traveling with Praiseworthy, to be sharing adventures and even misfortunes. Were you always a butler? He asked. Always. Jack brushed the hair out of his eyes. I mean, if you weren't a butler, you wouldn't have to call me Master Jack. You could call me Jack, plain Jack. I remember him talking about this before, how he wanted Praiseworthy to just call him Jack. Oh, I couldn't do that. It wouldn't be proper. No, indeed. But I'd like it just fine. We mustn't forget my position, Master Jack. But if we strike it rich, you won't have to be a butler anymore. Oh, I shouldn't like to be anything but a butler. Not for a moment. I was born to my calling, like my father before me and his father before him. It will please me to go on serving your Aunt Arabella. Look there, Master Jack. I believe that is the constellation of the Whale. A fine sight, isn't it? Okay. Well, now I've seen a couple times where this extra space is happening in my book. And every time it happens, the story is continuing, but it's like time or the location has kind of changed. And so I think those extra spaces are to tell me that maybe a couple hours or a day or two has passed in between what I just read and what I'm going to read. Or maybe they moved from on the top of the deck to the lower decks, right? But they don't need to tell me all the parts of like he walked down the stairs, through the galley, down another set of stairs. So to let me know that like time has passed or the location has changed, the author has put some spaces here to let me know. So maybe that's something I want to do when I do my writing, right? So I think that's pretty cool, and it helps me know what's going on in this book. The two gold ships, linked together like sausages, went lumbering through the sea. On the 5th day, see that? 5 days later, a puff of wind began to tug at the square rigger's jibs. And then, one after the other, the topsails, the royals, and the mainsails swelled out like great white clouds. By grabs, she's caught a wind, roared Captain Swain, leaning out of the pilot house window. With a general shout, the square rigger threw off the tow lines, and the two ships parted. There was a final exchange of good wishes. Then the Lady Wilma kicked up her paddle wheels, relieved of her burden, and sprinted forward. She was back in the race. All right, that was chapter 2 and chapter 3 of By the Great Horn Spoon. We will read more next week. Thanks, Room 13.